whether they be minor, whether they be horrible crimes. Well, we are asking for people to understand the facts and understand that these people, it is important that they reintegrate back into society and become productive, safe citizens. And that sex offender registry and related laws are providing a huge barrier to that. And the collateral damage we talk about is related to these ongoing punishments after they've served their sentence, they've finished their parole, their probation, their treatment, so on and so forth. I haven't seen anything so stark and such an example of this than recently. There was a video made by someone that did a kind of a journalistic type interview of a gentleman whose daughter, who was 16 years old, committed suicide because of the way that she was being treated at school. And I'll gladly provide that link for somebody if they want it, especially a member of the media. It's on YouTube. But I gotta say, that was one of the hardest videos I've ever watched in my life. So, it's not about the former offender, just the former offender. It's also about their families. And I've heard people say really hurtful things like, I don't care about their family. So what? She married a sex offender. Well, we've really got to move beyond this and ask ourselves, is this the country we want to live in? Where we're sacrificing basic human rights, where we are willing to violate the United States Constitution and say, well, we don't need the Constitution for this group of people because they somehow don't deserve it any longer. I think just about everybody, whether you're politically conservative or liberal, can really understand how dangerous that is. A lot of these laws were passed with good intentions, but what we are learning, we have 15 years of history now, is these laws are endangering people more than they are protecting. Even victims. Victims, most of the time, in 93% of the case, are generally someone that the child, if it's a child sex crime, that the child knows and loves. Once a family's reintegrated, guess what? That child's name's on the registry. Their family's on the registry. Their father's picture is on the registry. Sometimes victims are afraid to come forward because they know it's a life sentence for the loved one that may be abusing them. Victims are having to testify many times in court because of threat from this persecution. This is not helpful. I've been in contact with victims' organizations, and I can tell you some of them are terrified. The ones that have done research of these laws because they're afraid this is going to increase violence down the road. Adam Walsh, again, is one of the big things we're here fighting against. It's just the latest rendition of the former sex offender punishment laws. Retroactive, doesn't matter, offense-based, nothing's taken into account as far as what a person, who a person really is, what they've done in the 10, 20, 30 years since they've committed their offense. What we're asking is certainly that we must get back to a risk-based assessment system that is adjudicated by a court of law, that involves therapy experts, so we can narrow down who are the 3 to 5, 6, 8%, depending on the statistic that you hear, that are most likely to offend, that are dangerous. And how can we manage those few people, but also give them the opportunity to earn their way off the registry at some point. Putting millions of people, that's the 700,000 plus people that are on the registry, as well as their family members, is not the answer. That serves no purpose. Must have finality. If you're going to have a criminal justice system, there has to be a finality to the punishment so that somebody knows that if they do good, they can move on in their lives. I got involved just because I saw this human rights crisis coming. My co-organizer in New Mexico actually got involved that way. Matter of fact, probably a third of the people that helped me in New Mexico have nothing to do with it. They have no relatives, no friends on the registry. They haven't been directly affected, but they recognize a crisis, and I find that amazing. Myself, I committed a crime when I was 17 years old. That was 24 years ago. Of course, there was no registry, there was no computers, really, no internet back then, I should say. Then they created a registry in '95, and then in 2000, our legislature in my state decided to make it retroactive. And eventually, going through records 5 years later, they caught up to me and asked me to register for 20 years. Now, I'm not under any illusion that if I register for 20 years, there'll be a finality to it. Even if I got through the next 15 of those years, they'll just change the law and they'll pull me back in if I don't fight back. As well as law enforcement began taking, they didn't like the idea that I have a business, so they started attacking my business and trying to find ways because they didn't feel like it was fair that I had a business. And I've heard other stories like this similarly lately. Law enforcement, in some cases, has taken this ability to persecute people endlessly, even outside the law and outside the statute, because they know we don't have money to fight back. Many of us are broke or have very little funds available. So that's kind of how I got into it. When I went to the conference in Boston last year, the thing that struck me was I realized it's not just about me. I realized this is a moral obligation as a part of this crisis to fix it. Not just for myself or my family or my young son out there, but for everybody, including victims, there were things I just didn't know. I didn't know the field of therapy had been decimated by these laws. That, I didn't know how victims were being affected, and I since then have learned that this problem goes even, I'll give you a good website, freerangekids.com, and this woman did a study, and it was something like you'd have to leave your child on a street corner for 700,000 years to get abducted, to be one of the 90 or so abductions a year. I mean, this is reality, yet people are not allowing their children to play outside. They're afraid they're going to be abducted. Parents are afraid to volunteer for children's activities because they might be accused. I had an aging Naval War veteran come up to me and a lawmaker and say, I was going to volunteer in middle school recently. I decided I couldn't take the risk. So these shocking realizations, along with the heartbreaking stories of the collateral damage and the absolute hopelessness for millions of people with no potential for relief, is why I'm here.